Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
And we have a guest with us today. Eric, please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Eric Lanigan. I've been working as an executive coach for about 15 years now, and I'm passionate about helping people understand how their emotions are rational signals that are trying to guide them in their life motivationally and to resolve how they perceive reality.
I love
Excellent.
it. Two questions really quick. One, you said emotional, or what sort of coach?
Motivational coach?
Motivational.
Or executive coach
That's
sort
what
of
it was.
specializes in helping people do what they want to do. Focus
Also, executive meaning like executive function?
Yeah, it ends up being that a little bit, but oftentimes no, it's more with executives and companies.
Oh,
Could
okay,
be anyone,
nice.
so surgeons or lawyers or what.
And how did you come to get in touch with Eneasz? Do you guys meet up at Lighthaven, or?
Oh, this is an interesting story.
Yeah, go. Why don't you take the lead on that, Eneasz, if you want? Yeah.
Sure. I was doing the Methods of Rationality podcast, and at some point in the official email, I got an email come in from someone who said, I'm passing through Denver. I'm going on, I don't know, you were going cross country somewhere.
I'm going to Denver, actually, yeah.
Oh, you were going to Denver?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said, hey, I'm going to be there. Do you want to meet up for a meal? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? This sounds great. And we met and we talked and we really hit it off and it was great. And we met again the next day for dinner again with you and your wife. And I don't know, just had a really good time. And then you were like, hey, Eneasz, you want to go to Burning Man? And I said, fuck it. Let's go for it. I'm making changes in my life. I don't know. I went to Burning Man that year and we've been pretty close since. I had always assumed, the thing is, okay, your camp, first of all, pretty nerdy in terms of Burning Man camps. Like there's the hippie camps, there's the more wastelander camps. There's a whole bunch of different camps at Burning Man with different feels. This is one of the more nerdy camps. It has hippie mixed in, but there's a fair number of people there that are rationalist adjacent or just straight up rationalist now. And I had always assumed that you were a rationalist too, especially because I met you due to you listening to Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. But I think that's not the case, I recently learned.
I wouldn't say, this is a great segue into that. I wouldn't say I'm not rationalist. I think that when I bumped into rationality, I bumped into something that I've found in a lot of places, which is it seems as if there wasn't a lot of discussion about emotions. Emotions weren't included in the rational processing of things. And I had spent most of my adult life into my mid-20s, maybe late 20s, sort of using the rational mind to shift how I was perceiving reality for the better. And it's not to say that rationalists are against that, because that is what they're all about. They're about just getting to the bottom of what's true. It was just that when I encountered it, it just felt too heady to me. And I was in a place where I was out of that heady phase of my life.
Well, hopefully you can help us level up our game at this, because I agree that at the very least, every rationalist I know, at least that I know closely, puts emotions and their attention to them high on their list of things they care about. But it doesn't seem to be high on the list of things that are discussed in the community.
Yeah, the official line and the thing that we all say, and in some ways, I guess, believe, the official thinking is that emotions are actually very valuable. We certainly care about what our emotional state is. We want it to be the best possible. Emotions are very valuable input. They tell us a lot of things. They should be used as tools for all sorts of things. But I mean, there's that phrase used as tools, right? They're input tools, or they are motivational tools or something. And despite how much the official line is no, emotions are really important and valuable, and we focus on them and we integrate them, the vibes in practice always come out to a very much they are an instrumental good. They're something to be used for other purposes. And I swear to God, you really have to go through a strongly analytical Spock-like phase. Despite the fact that we're always fighting against the straw Vulcan, there definitely is especially in the beginning, a Vulcan-like aspect to how do we integrate our emotions with ourselves and the world. I think it takes all rationalists a while to get anywhere with it. And that is one of the reasons I thought this would be really interesting and valuable to have you on, because you seem to have gone to a next level with integrating emotions and what they mean.
Well, thanks. And I definitely started off in a place where I didn't really know that emotions were a thing you could talk about, very rational, purely logical, up until maybe age 21, when I ended up at a week-long personal growth retreat led by Peter Senge out of MIT. And that week-long retreat, there were a lot of exercises that were like, what do you want? What are you feeling? What's important to you? Continuing to bring attention back to your feelings. And after that, I was like, wow, there's this whole universe that I didn't really realize that existed, and ended up meditating. And in the process of meditating, developing ultimately a richer awareness of my internal reality. A lack of signal awareness that means that you're just not seeing reality from the emotional perspective clearly. The data is getting lost, not relayed, or not processed correctly by your subconsciousness. And so the global workspace of your consciousness is not getting that information accurately. Emotions are the input to our processing. We like, emotions are pointing our attention at what seems to be relevant to our needs. At least that's how I make sense of emotions. And then there's feelings, which you could say are the output of some sort of thinking or processing rationally. So you have the thinking that interprets the emotions in the context of the present circumstances. And then feelings are like a byproduct of that. So you both have the input emotions that are a byproduct of how your subconsciousness is processing. Then there's the way that those emotions are sort of interpreted rationally or abstractly with concepts. And then there's another that feeds back into the perception process. And then you have another layer of sort of feelings after that. And it's all happening simultaneously. It's not like an isolated path, but we're just like describing how it seems to happen.
So what is it that we're trying to do?
It's really helpful to identify just the somatic experience of emotions in the body prior to any interpretation.
Can you give an example? Because I think I know what you're talking about, but I've been told that I intellectualize my feelings, and I, even after having read the Wikipedia page and stuff, don't quite know what that means. And I've been asked before, like, where do you feel that in your body? And, everyone's familiar with, like, oh, sinking feeling in one's stomach or something. But I guess, yeah, if you have an illustrative example, that might be helpful. Actually, this is a trick, too, that I've used. I think I first heard about it on Sam Harris's podcast, or maybe one of his books before he was podcasting, because I've been doing this for years and years. But I used to be tremendously socially anxious and hated public speaking. And it's not like I seek those things out now, but I've given presentations in front of groups as large as like 40, 50, 60. The physical sensations of anxiety are very close to the physical sensations of excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can kind of just turn your attention to those feelings, the physiological feelings, and just say, no, I'm excited, I'm not nervous. And it's not exactly that easy, but it's not much harder than that. Is that maybe kind of what you're talking about?
That's a great example, because the input is the experience. So in that case, you have two different sort of frames on the stress response. There's the distress response, which is like a threat to your attachment needs. Like, so you're going to say something and everything's going to go bad, right, in the presentation, or someone's going to judge you or whatever, right? There's the fear side of things, or the avoid or prevent side of things. And then when you can flip that into the authenticity, expression, the excitement, the inspiration, the stress term is eustress, EUSTRES, rather than distress, eustress, like euphoria. And that is really one of the core transitions that, if you can start to make that, you're starting to live in tune with your emotional signals in a way that's sort of authentically creative. And you're looking for, like, what is the desire behind the emotion that I'm feeling? What I was talking about earlier is like developing this ability to feel. And as that capacity to feel grows, as you have like more data input, you start to notice, how does it feel before, during, and after doing things? As you just attune to that, you don't have to change your behavior. Like, every action you take is itself already an experiment. Every action, even if it's a habit you've been doing for 20 years, there is an experiment in it, and you get data. How does it feel before, during, and after doing it? And the more you pay attention to that data, and the richer that data becomes, the next time you're about to do that coping mechanism, the more you can have a sense of, before doing it, what the outcome is going to be. And if the outcome is going to be something that's not, like, you start to anticipate that's not going to actually solve the problem, it's just going to kick the problem down the road, or lead to even more pain or suffering, or, you overeat. And so now you feel shitty because you're too full, and you just want to slouch into the couch and watch Netflix. You start to anticipate, and then you're like, okay, what else can I do? And that opens the door to start to tune your own behavior based on contact with reality, based on good experiential data. And that makes for sort of effortless habit change, because now you're noticing what's the marginal sort of benefit and cost of having one more bite of food, for example. The benefit is maybe the taste. The cost is I'll feel even more full. And at some point, you just start to dial it back, sort of bite by bite, if you want, until you're starting to eat in attunement with your own body and how it feels. It's not through, I should eat less. It's not through calorie counting. It's just through attunement with how things actually feel.
I love that analogy as someone who a few times a year enjoys all you can eat sushi. There's all you can eat, and then there's all you should eat, or you'll feel like crap.
Yeah.
And finding that line, it involves exactly the kind of like attention that you're talking about. Of like, do we order more? I'm at a good spot now. Will I be at a good spot if I have a handful more? No, okay, we'll call it then.
I've heard that focusing on how you feel after has really helped people with breaking social media addiction, because often afterwards you just don't feel very good. You seem to imply that like you think about the how I feel before, during, and after doing this thing would apply to almost every bite of food. How often do you do this thing?
So here's the thing, is that we're not conscious all the time, right? Like we're not conscious that we're conscious, at least all the time. So there's this precious thing that is our conscious awareness when we actually have the ability to take in information. And it seems when someone is starting to pay attention to how things feel before, during, and after, there's this emotional check before certain behavior that starts to wake consciousness up, go from like system 1, autopilot, to system 2, conscious awareness, to like double check what's about to be done. And in that double checking mode, you don't even have to change the behavior. It just creates what is essentially just another experiment that you can run, because you're now present. You're able to sort of notice, what am I feeling before I eat this hamburger? And then while you're eating the hamburger, if you have the awareness, how does it feel to eat the hamburger? At some point, the whole process starts to be a little bit more embodied knowing. Like it's just more about getting in tune with your body, or getting in tune with your relationship dynamics in terms of what feels good in your relationships and boundaries and everything. Once there's awareness in a particular dynamic where prior there wasn't awareness in terms of how it felt to you to be in this friend group, to be in this relationship, to be in this relationship with food or media consumption or whatever, you sort of find this natural way of attuning. And then your subconsciousness is going to start to wake you up when it's noticing that things aren't feeling good. Typically, when someone is finding themselves engaging in content that has a lot of anger or anxiety, it's often because they have those emotions in their body and they're just looking for something that like allows for an outlet to experience those emotions as well. And so what I noticed in myself is when I had anger, it was really helpful to be like, all right, so this thing is sparking this anger. This anger kind of feels good to feel, or this anxiety kind of feels good to feel. But what's the desire behind it? There is something that you want underneath the anger. Anger and anxiety are both sort of secondary emotions that are highlighting, or that are sort of protective from other needs. There's a desire underneath both of those. And so if you can just ask the question, like, what's the desire that's giving rise to the anxiety, or what's the desire that's giving rise to the anger or the frustration, you can start to find a direction. Frustration.
You're right. Anger and anxiety don't come out of nowhere. They come out of, I think, typically wanting something to be different. But if you're not attending to your emotions and trying to identify where they're coming from and why, you might not know why you're anxious. In general, those feelings are a response to maybe the unconscious thought, this should be different. I want this to change.
I have this thing I've been bouncing around for, I don't know, a few weeks now. We have been talking about consciousness and what it means to be human a bunch over the past several months. We've had Andrew Cutler on a few times now, whose thesis is that human self-awareness, sapience, doesn't come until after we have language. Once we can think the thought that I am and start recursively reflecting upon that allows us to have higher order thinking and to become the humans that we are. Animals, you can still see them running around and having feelings in the world And what separates them from automata? Like, how is a grasshopper meaningfully different from a really advanced thermostat with a whole lot of inputs trying to optimize its local environment for having more grasshoppers as opposed to optimize its local environment for changing temperature, right? What I think I'm coming down to is that the brain initially is there to help the coordination of the body, to move the body, right? Like, that was the first thing neural structures were for. Eventually we got to the point now where we can plan ahead and model many different people and model ourselves and model aspects of ourselves in a way that helps us alter our environment in vastly more effective ways. But I think there's an in-between step where the brain does thinking, but the thinking it does is basically emotions. Emotions are how animals think. It's what the brain does before you have language, in addition to just moving your muscles around. When you're an animal and you learn, that is your brain over time adjusting to have more and more good emotions about a certain thing or bad emotions about a different thing. And that motivates you to move your muscles in certain ways around these stimuli. They get more complex as the animals get more higher order, but it seems that emotions are just it's just a way to have thoughts that we are not linguistically conscious of. And so I think in that way, emotions can possibly be wrong. And in fact, probably the younger you are, the more often your emotions are wrong and do need to be trained to be different by the adults around you. And
Let me first start by saying I was at like a zoo playground thing, Happy Hollow, in San Jose yesterday with my 4.5-year-old and my wife. And I happened to go down a slide that my daughter later found out had a sign that said no adults. And I went down this slide 3 times.
Oh, you rule breaker.
And she explicitly was like stuck on it for hours. And she kept saying, I can't stop thinking about the bad things you did, Papa. And it's like, well, what are you feeling? She's like, well, I feel bad. And I want to stop thinking, but I can't. And she also said some really amazing other insightful things. She's like, if I can't stop myself from thinking about something, I need a treat. And then I have a treat. And that usually helps me stop thinking about something. It's like, all right, great. She's already using emotional coping strategies of sugar.
and the emotional coping strategy of emotional blackmail at you to say, we need to stop for ice cream because you broke the rules.
Well, I don't even think she's there, but yeah.
I love
that might develop. Yeah.
I love how attentive she is to her feelings, because like getting a child under, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 to be aware of their feelings at all, I think is challenging. But having a parent at least one parent as emotionally, sapient as you are, seems to be cultivating an amazing sense of her own emotions herself. I wonder if part of her feeling was a response to the fact of like, no, you broke a rule. And when I break rules, I shouldn't. And so like just this weird sense of like this, not weird, but this inarticulable sense of injustice.
I think there was a fear that I would get in trouble. But I guess what I wanted to highlight is that it seems like the function of emotion is to hold our attention on something. This is how I make sense of it sort of in the model that I'm developing, is like the emotions hold attention on the gap between reality as we perceive it and reality as we desire it, which allows us to have emotions that mark a gap around threats and around opportunities and around unknowns. And with attention held somewhere, that's when the thinking starts to process. What it seems that my daughter's doing is there's something that happened. She has an emotion that's about it, probably in the context that you're talking about, where there's some fear that I might get in trouble, and that means bad things for her because I go to jail, because that's a whole concept. We spend a long time right after that being like, what other things cause people to go to jail? Now her attention's on it with her emotions, and now her thinking is going to be on it, and it's going to be ruminating on it until it resolves the situation. And it ended up being that, we had to go up to a park, guide or, someone who works there, and was like, hey, here's the deal. I went down the slide and it said no adults. My daughter's concerned that I'm like going to get in trouble and that bad things are going to happen. And the guy was like, oh no, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Everything's totally fine. And that kind of like a little bit appeased Aurora, but So that's one of the things I just want to highlight is that I think you're right. Like there seems to be some motivational function to emotions. And to me, it's in part because it's drawing attention to some need in the context of a threat or an opportunity or an unknown.
I strongly get the feeling lately that we kind of have two brains. The emotion brain that was given to us by evolution and has been there forever, and then the sort of reasoning brain that we as Homo sapiens have developed and added on top of that. And maybe a lot of the goal is to try to integrate these two brains better so that they're heading in the same direction and reinforcing each other rather than fighting each other.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, how many times have we said that we cannot wait to shed these meat suits? I want to be uploaded somewhere into the internet and leave the body behind entirely so I can be free and just live as the being that I am. And that intrinsically says that what I am is the conscious thinking part and everything else is just there to support that and keep it going. I'm sort of coming along around to the conclusion that there is another brain within that I don't know how valuable it is. I don't know if it's worth saving and bringing along somewhere as well, or if really the core important part of me is the thinking part. But I think that is where the feeling of Spock-likeness of rationalists comes from, that we do very much focus on just the rational thinking, analyzing thing, in large part because it's so fucking powerful, and it is what we identify as. And honestly, I think that as children, humans in general are taught, ignore the emotion brain because lots of times it's going to lead you to bad places. You're going to throw your toys and like break windows, and we don't want any of that. Be more rational. And I think that's for the most part for the benefit of humanity. Like, we've gotten huge gains from that. And maybe as we get older, we can start reintegrating the emotional brain once we've trained it to work better with the rest of our lives and the rest of the humans around us. Because I really do think early on in life, it's extremely unruly. And if we didn't override it for the first couple decades, maybe 3 decades of our lives, we'd be very much living like the animals without great housing and shelter and internet and podcasts.
I have a clarifying question. When you said, especially small children, their emotions can be wrong. What does that mean for their emotion to be wrong? Do you mean like just kind of the example given in what's the less wrong sequence, feeling rationally, where you're angry at something like that isn't real, or you're upset about a fiction?
What I mean is that it's badly aligned with the environment it finds itself in, so the consequences of going along with those emotions will be bad. It's like, you can even see this with a tiger cub. If a tiger cub is doing something, being really loud when there's some good reason for it not to be loud, it's scaring away the prey or something, the mom will swipe it across the nose and be like, shut the fuck up. Even animals need to have their emotions aligned over time as they're growing up. It's just there's far fewer things going on in their environment. And so it's the training is much quicker and can happen, in a matter of months maybe, whereas with humans, it just can't.
So this is pretty interesting. I want to take that as a launch point, because the mama tiger in this example doesn't have a lot of communication methods. Bonking the tiger cub might be the clearest way to get the attention and to convey, don't do that. Yeah. Whereas with adults, when you're raising a human child, you can do that. You can swat at the child. You can yell at the child. You can scare the child. All of those things equate to, very similar mechanisms that the tiger mom would use.
But thankfully, we have a few more tools in our tool belt.
But you can also explain. Yeah, exactly. We have language to be able to say, like, here's the situation, and here's, what the potential threats are, and here's, when you come to a street, the cars might not see you because you're a little bit smaller. And so we want to make sure that you're going to be with an adult when you cross the street. Because if you got hit by a really big heavy metal car that was going fast, it would really, really hurt. You remember that time Joe from school ran into you? You remember how much that hurt? Can you imagine how much more it would hurt to be hit by a big car, right? Like, all of that is tying the lived experience that the child already has in with the bigger, broader context of reality so that they can connect the dots. It's amazing how fast that the kids genuinely can integrate that. And without that, like, knowledge framing, just the swatting or the screaming, get away from the road, it just causes a freeze response. So it stops the child, but the child doesn't develop. And when you have a distress response, fear is the mind killer. Like, that's what happens. The child just shuts into a distress response, a fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. one of the ways in which humans are unique is that we have a model of reality that's built up within each one of us. So historically, throughout evolution, the models of the reality are sort of wired into the DNA of the species. So if you take a frog that's in the Amazon rainforest, you could say a model of the environment of that rainforest is built into the DNA of the frog. If you take that frog out of the rainforest and put it in the desert or some other environment, it's not going to be adapted to that environment, and it's going to die because it's basically like a collection of stimulus response mechanisms in the DNA. It needs a particular type of bug to fly in a particular kind of speed and whatever, so that it can shoot its tongue out to catch whatever, right? Like if there's not that bug, maybe if the environment's changing slow enough, it can adapt and evolve. But if it's too fast, it won't, and it'll go extinct. And we as humans are really unique because our thinking has allowed us to create internal models. You can have humans that are living anywhere on the planet because it's just a matter of learning the way to survive in those environments and then passing that knowledge down. And then at that point, evolution is not so much in DNA, but it's in terms of what works better as a society in the context of our present environment. And then let's look at emotions in general and imagine you're a tribe in the Amazon rainforest. Imagine what emotions are like for a member of this tribe that's living in the rainforest. How many things are going to be causing emotions for you versus someone who first thing when they wake up is checking their phone, checking the news, checking their email. The emotional complexity of a modern, civilized or whatever, like a person, like the amount of incoming information that's triggering emotions in our system and like setting off all sorts of signals that we then have to somehow sort through and prioritize and identify the right emotions to take actions on to resolve the things in our life in a positive direction is completely different. Because if you're the person in the rainforest, you don't have any of that random noise that's also triggering emotions in your emotional space, right? Mm-hmm. You have a feeling and it's like, oh, that was this other person in the tribe who did something that I didn't like. It's very clear, very obvious. And you can use that emotion to draw the attention there to resolve the thing. And we have, by the time we've been awake for 30 minutes, we've probably had 20 bits of input that have created different emotions. In the same way that if you're watching a movie, your body doesn't know that the movie is different from reality entirely. Like your body starts to perceive that sensory information as if it's you living your life, and you have sadness when there's sadness for the main character, and you have anger when there's injustice or whatever, right? It's just how our body is making sense of incoming sensory input.
The modern signals like texts, emails, social media, those kinds of things, those signals feel like really impoverished, emaciated types of signals compared to the rich signals we would get when you see someone face to face, and you can see every bit of their body language and hear them and get all these other contextual inputs. Like, you got to make so many assumptions, and most of them aren't going to be, not only are they not going to be good, they're just going to be not based on enough information.
Yeah, and I think this kind of ties in with this other piece that you were talking about earlier. Emotions are at their core linked to motivation, and they're trying to sort of identify the threats or opportunities or unknowns in our environment so that we can essentially either model our environment better, right? If you have an unknown, you need to discover what the unknown is so that it's not a potential threat. Or if you have a threat or an opportunity, you need to have your attention held on those things with attention mobilized so you can double check with consciousness to make sure that you're mitigating the threat, preventing the threat, or capitalizing on the potential opportunity as best you can, given your resources. To tie it back to the thing you said too, like to try to disengage from the meat sacks of our bodies, what you're trying to get away from, I think, is emotions that are keeping you from doing what you think you want to do, achieving or creating or spending your time or, feeling a particular way. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, like if you disengage from the meat sacks, then you also disengage from feeling. And how can you enjoy if you're disconnected from your feeling? So there's some logical inconsistency there. Like you have to be feeling in order to feel happy.
most of the reason for wanting to shed the meat suit is that they're fragile, they ache all the time, or sometimes, depending on how lucky you are.
Got it.
You know, like the physical problems of having to deal with something that, you know, has all these biological needs. Enosh and I have had lots of hours of back and forth about specifically the idea of tuning one's emotions intentionally. When we read Worth the Candle, without spoilers, there's a capacity to do something like that. And Enosh and I took different sides as to how we would approach that tool. This might be a fun exercise just to try. You know, anytime you have a feeling, next time you have one, Enosh, about especially a strong one, check it with your body and see where, like, what your body feels like everywhere. Butterflies in your stomach is a good thing, but too many butterflies is nervousness, right?
I've always felt it's the other way around, that I have a feeling, like I meaning, you know, my soul, my thought process, my emotion complex, whatever you want to call it, and that affects my body. Like I get angry and that raises my heart rate, or I get scared and that causes whatever other effects that my body has in response to that fear.
I think that the counterpoint to that is that if you've ever taken a anti-anxiety medication or a beta blocker or an amphetamine, you'll start feeling things that aren't in response to your thoughts. It's a response to your physiology. The thing for me that makes anti-anxiety meds work so well for flying, which I find I need less and less now, is that they make me physiologically incapable of experiencing anxiety, or at least it dulls all that down. And so I think it's not just that like I'm handling the anxiety better because I'm on a chill pill. It's that my heart is actually going less fast because of the way this drug is impacting it. That's definitely true, I think, for beta blockers. I wonder, I'm trying to picture what it would be like to be a brain in a vat if some mad scientist abducted me and shoved my brain in a jar. I think I would intellectually be distressed, but I'd be experiencing none of the experience of distress rather. Like my palms wouldn't be sweaty, my heart wouldn't be racing because I don't have any of that, right? Like I think I would intellectually know I don't like it here, but I think there would be, at least the emotions would be different.
If you think about what the body is also a sensing organism. It's taking in lots of sensory information, processing it, even subconsciously, and then relevant sensory information is collectively amalgamized into the global workspace, and use that theory as a framing, like the one space that unites all of our sensory information, our internal and external sensory information, and also includes emotions, and also allows us to think abstractly about this thing that we're in. But in reality, it's all disconnected sensory inputs that get integrated in this thing that we, as the sense of self or consciousness, exist inside of. And then as far as stress goes, like you have a racing heart because it's mobilizing oxygen to your brain so you can focus. It's an interconnected system. Stress is really important. Here's something that I haven't mentioned that I think is really relevant, is that within emotions, and stress, you could say, is a kind of emotion marking importance, there is some aspect of that emotion that's holding attention somewhere that the body, through past conditioning, thinks is relevant. And within that emotion or stress response, there is energy that's being expended by the body to focus attention on solving that unknown or threat or opportunity, on addressing it. And if we're not like attuned to these things, then our body is going into a essentially problem-solving mode, if you want to think about it that way. And we're numbing out the information. That energy gets sort of stored in the body. You know, we have to develop these like ever-evolving coping mechanisms or distraction, layering patterns to numb out these emotions that are trying to draw our attention to things in our life that are telling us we actually would be happier if we did this, or if we said no to this, or if we said yes to this. Emotions are a really core element to what we determine, like how we can find meaning and how we actually connect with other people. Like meaning seems to be tied to connection with other people.
Yeah.
And connection with other people requires some amount of emotional attunement, compassion, empathy, shared caring, shared feeling. It's more fun to go to the movies with your friends because you're all sharing in the joy together. It's kind of like there's this compounding positive experience.
That sort of social aspect of emotion I love the movie example because there's few things that have the same kind of fun as watching a movie with somebody that you love that they haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
And so not only do you get to watch something that you like, but you probably wouldn't have spent 2 hours doing that if you were alone, but watching somebody watch it and seeing, oh man, are they going to like the stuff I liked is so much fun. I'm afraid I've got a hard stop that came up sooner than anticipated. But Eric, this has been really cool, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. I want to definitely talk more about this either via email or another episode or something. But I feel like we've only like touched on the cool stuff, and I really want to dive into all of it.
Yeah,
Eric, you're okay sticking around a little bit longer to talk just
Yeah.
a little more on this?
absolutely.
All right, cool. I think you mentioned embodiment a couple times, like the embodiment of feelings.
hmm
What is that exactly?
I don't know if I use that word exactly. I think maybe
Okay.
I did say something like embodied knowledge, which you could say is kind of like when a body has developed a model of reality. Either that model of reality is attuned to its actual environment or not. It seems that we have emotions, but then we also have a conditioned way to interpret those emotions. That those emotions are like physiological experiences in the body, have an automatic way that they're interpreted, which is why autopilot is kind of a complex thing. There's like subconscious autopilot, like our heart beating, like we can't feel our neurons firing when we're moving our arms, or digestion, like that happens on its own. And then there's autopilot that we're kind of like sort of conscious through, where we can remember, oh yeah, I did that thing. Oh yeah, I always do that thing, and that's not good or whatever. And then there's actual, maybe I would call it free consciousness, where we're aware that we're aware. Descartes that I think therefore I am, which is essentially you can doubt everything except that you're doubting, and so therefore there is the thinking process that you can identify as validating that you exist. And it's this consciousness that has a distinct subject object relationship with physical reality, with thoughts, with emotions, in which all of those things arise. And that lets us start to explore the incoming sensory information that's outputting certain experiences, and then how are those emotional experiences being interpreted.
When you were talking to me, you said like you think this is the most important thing you can do with your life and one of the most important things that people should do in general. What is it exactly that you are trying to do that is the very important thing?
That's a great question. I think first, the message that our emotions are rational in the sense that they are a byproduct of how our body is processing sensory information based on its past lived experience. And so it's attempting to highlight threats, opportunities, and unknowns, but it's limited to its past lived experience, including a lot of, our childhood, where a lot of the neurological system was laid down. So someone who grew up in China and immigrates to the US, they have a system that was wired in a particular context, and then they go somewhere else and it's going to be different for them to make sense of sensory information.
So emotions, the optimal emotions can differ from culture to culture and time or place.
Well, it's all about environmental fit, right?
Yeah. And so there are some times where you should feel a certain level of social anxiety then.
You necessarily would, because there's unknowns. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
anxiety is just, anxiety and stress are just waking consciousness up. It's the body's mobilizing resources to double check, to pay attention, to be a little bit more present, right? If there's a potential threat, or again, like an unknown, you want your attention to be more here and now so you can assess or learn. And kind of like if you think of AI as having a black box, right? We have our black box, which is our subconsciousness. When you pay attention to the outputs of our subconsciousness in terms of when we do things, how does it feel before, during, and after doing them? We're looking at the outputs of those behaviors, like the emotional or experiential outputs of those behaviors. It starts to change the weighting in terms of where the subconsciousness is going to take in different information differently. Once you can start to listen to those emotions and see that those emotions are maybe tied to changing relationships or friendships or expressing yourself more or something, like then there's actions you take to actually change your life for the better. Now those emotional signals have been acted upon and resolved in the same way that, having that conversation with the fellow tribes person actually resolves the emotional tension in that dynamic. That was very simple because that was the primary emotion, because there wasn't a lot of other emotional noise. We're just like learning how to resolve emotional signals actually lets us, one, feel better, it's like I like to use the example of like clearing your emotional inbox. All of these emotions and emotional signals about how your life is, build up. They get bigger and bigger, and unless you start to listen to those signals, it just gets more overwhelming to go into your inbox, in the same way that it kind of gets more overwhelming to go into your email inbox the more emails you have. But the only way you'll ever get through it is to look at them kind of one by one, and many of them might be outdated because opportunities close. You get older. There's emails that are completely irrelevant if you don't check your email for a while.
How do we look into those emotions, those emails?
The progression I really like is, and I'm working on designing a new sort of free course around this. The first thing that's really useful is to just start to, there's behaviors that we already have that we kind of have flagged as things we want to do more of or possibly do less of based on whatever experiential data we have around those behaviors. And so if you take those kinds of things like screen time and you notice how does it feel before, doing, and after what you're already doing, you turn your autopilot behaviors, what you're already doing, into experiments where you're gathering experiential data. With enough sort of experiential data, your subconsciousness will weigh consciousness when you're about to take an action that it starts to predict will not give you the result you actually want. And at that point, you have an opportunity to start to tune based on how things would actually feel, which is entirely different than trying to force behavior with some abstract framework of what you should do. So you're getting contact with reality, you're getting experiential emotional data or physical data in terms of how it feels to eat something or whatever. And you're able to tune based on that data. And then the tuning is a lot slower, right? Because in experiments that you're running as a scientist, you want to control variables, you want to see the causal connection. So the same thing we're doing here, you start to make finer tuning with one variable. You have one byte less and see how that feels.
You said it's slow, but I think it's actually much faster than the default. Like, I think anybody will slowly start to get emotional predilections for some things and aversions for other things. And I think it's pretty slow and pretty undirected. In the rationalist community, there was a Less Wrong post called Ugg Fields, which talked on this topic, that when something is predictably always results in some sort of negative consequence, you'll get more and more emotionally averse to doing things that are related to that without even noticing it. And it takes time. And then it also takes a long time to like alter things afterwards. If things start getting better, you can retain those for way after it's actually adaptive to have those. What you're talking about is a way to really supercharge that, to notice and feel, what am I feeling right now? Is this the correct feeling? How do I feel afterwards? And I think that would very quickly update you. This lets you do that in a much more directed and quick and, I dare say, rationalist way, although
yeah,
I'm not sure you would like that term.
No, of course. No, I do love that term. I think rational, like, to be rationalist, I think you really have to be attuned with your own emotional experience, because that's a large component of what's going on inside the system, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to do that because, like, lots of times, like, why am I feeling this way? I don't even know. Half the time, you don't even notice that you're feeling any particular way. You're just going through life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the whole process like starts to get faster. Part of the reason why I like starting off with just running the experiments you're already running, how does it feel before, during, and after doing it, is that it takes all the pressure off behavior change and just turns on observation. And then you start to experiment in small ways. And all of that process is developing awareness of how things actually feel, which itself it's an awareness practice. It's one thing to develop mindfulness in terms of like meditation, which can be really helpful, but this is kind of like the scientific action experience mindfulness. Like, how does it feel when I do something? You get to a point where you can then turn your attention in your body. Stress is a great first emotional signal to start to process, which is where is stress? Like, where do I have stress? Or you can feel stress and be like, when I feel a stress, where does my attention going? It's going to that there's something connected with reality and stress in your body that is that thing is being marked as important. And if you have agency around that thing, then you can resolve the stress response. And if there's no agency, you can reframe it and say, well, what desire is actually giving rise to this stress? Where do I have agency here? That stress is marking as important, and giving you the energy. Really, it's like mobilizing consciousness to address. And once you do that, then the stress responses can go. And chronic stress is just a whole bunch of stress responses that have been unresolved. At least that's one way to frame it.
Doesn't that require a certain amount of willingness and ability to actually fix or change whatever it turns out that the thing stressing you is?
Sort of, but you can kind of resolve a stress response by realizing you don't actually have agency over it, right?
Oh, like what Stephen was saying about just being less grumpy about that things aren't great.
Yeah, I mean, it's given your present circumstances, what do I want?
What if like what I want is beyond my ability to get?
So that's when you get into kind of frustration, which I think is the next good emotional signal to work with. So starting with stress, because it's the emotional signal in your inbox that's marked as urgent or priority. Frustration arises when you're stuck and can't take action or have the thing you want. Frustration itself is basically saying there's no way we can move forward with the information we have. And so it's all about finding small actions you can take to get more contact with reality that gives you more information. So you can take, small experimental steps to, if you feel stuck around a project, what is the thing that's actually stopping you from taking action? And then you can start to get a sense of where that frustration is tied in with reality. And is there an action you can take to start to generate the information needed? Maybe you have to email someone to get their thoughts, or you have to create a draft. You have some inner sense that it has to be perfect the first time it comes out, but upon closer inspection, the only way to having a final draft is by having a first draft. You just start to get a sense of what is really the block that loosens things up and just lets you take the next step, just the next step. Because as soon as you take that one step, everything changes. You have new information, you have new feeling data. It's like we can't anticipate what we will want 5 years from now, because you're always changing, and what your desires are, always are developing. It just makes way more sense to just figure out from this moment, given my circumstances and this directional desire, what is the next step?
So when people notice their emotions and then direct attention to whatever the stressor is that is saying, direct your attention here, and start working on things, is that basically the process? Is there another step after that? Or is this kind of like you loop on that? Is this the secret sauce?
We've talked about, I'd say 20 to 30% of the process.
Oh, okay. I know we don't have a ton of time, but what would you do after this?
Yeah, it's important to start to, in this somatic awareness of your emotions, realizing the way that we get resourced, where if you have a really nice time with some friends and something happens, maybe you get a promotion, so money is less of a stressor, or something happens, right? If you get resourced around your survival needs and your connection needs, you suddenly start to shift into more of a generous, open, caring, alive, buzzing with joy person. And it's really a lot more about resources than it is about any sort of character trait, which, of course, our society loves to label things and categorize people, but it's really a lot more about listening to the needs of the person. This is great for parenting. Parenting, if you can attune to the needs of the child and actually meet those needs, then suddenly they're not, irrational. It's just that they're hungry, and that's why they're crying irrationally, right? It's because there's a need that's not being met. Understanding that we do have this need for connection, and that there are ways to meet it. I won't necessarily talk about how, but I think there's a certain amount that's just vulnerably co-processing emotions with other people.
It almost sounds like you're saying the solution is to get more money, be more comfortable in life, and then things won't be nearly as much of a problem anymore.
That's true, right? But it's not just that, because there's the ways that we attune to what we want. In this particular case, I'm talking about developing connection needs. You can have an infinite amount of money and still be miserable because money doesn't allow you to connect with other people. Emotional self-awareness does. Authenticity does. Vulnerability does. It's just kind of recognizing that there's a way that you can be resourced in connection. So in terms of the progression, it's noticing how things feel before, during, and after, starting to through that experiential data, getting a better sense of how you can tune your life to what feels good in the moment, is developing self-awareness as you're also tuning your behaviors to something that feels good, and then developing an awareness of stress as something that is marking importance and mobilizing attention to resolve things in your life that have been marked as important. And then frustration as a signal that something isn't working, and learning how to listen to that signal, and then noticing that there is this capacity for openness and connection that arises when you have this sort of resourcing, which also means like energy, like eating better and having more sleep. There's that how do things feel before, during, and after doing? How does it feel to go to sleep 15 minutes earlier, to upon waking up, go outside and get sunlight on your face or something like that, right?
So working on those other things will make you more open to have good relationships with other people.
All of that is building up your internal your emotional self-awareness of how your emotions are connecting with reality around you. And that allows you to have a theory of mind of other people to model how they're modeling reality better.
Oh, okay. So working on yourself like that allows you to understand other people.
Yes.
What if they are all blocked up and they aren't connected with anything?
Well, I mean, this is why it's helpful to sort of find other people to like practice co-processing of emotional sensory information. We could talk about like what I'm trying to do. This is all I'm trying to create like a progression that introduces people in a really gentle way to develop emotional self-awareness things, and then start to form partnerships or small groups with other people so that they can start to co-process their emotional signals, which is essentially like running experiments. What do you think you want? You can either act on that or not act on that. You get sensory information either way, and then that starts to update.
It does sound a lot like what the hippies and the post-rats do. The, congregating together and working through, I don't know, this emotional processing kind of thing together.
Yeah. I'm also just barely familiar with the idea of like a post-rat. So it might be that there's alignment there in terms of what they're doing, possibly. I think it all still falls in the camp of sort of rationality, because you're just looking at the sensory information, how your body is processing sensory information around sort of the core basic needs that are built into the body. For example, if you have energy and safety because you're being nourished, you have sleep, and you have a house, right? And then you have elements of connection in your environment. It seems that when you have connection, it not only do you have in it this sense of my survival needs are met now, but you have this anticipation that if something went wrong, my survival needs would continue to be met, precisely because I now have a community in which I belong. There's like this anticipation that they'll take care of me. And all of that starts to create this sense of abundance, or like internal like deprioritization of a stress response that allows for a greater sense of authenticity, a greater sense of freedom to be curious and explore and go towards what you want rather than being in this protective mode.
So it sounds like you are strongly advocating for get started on this thing, but pretty quickly, don't wait too long to start finding some other people and work on this together as a group.
I 100% about that. 100%.
How would one go about doing that?
Something that's sort of a project that I'm working on is to start to create emotional processing hikes in the Bay Area, like to just go on hikes and talk with people if you want to, or process on your own, but like having a safe environment to just talk through things, and also sort of creating an online community space. I had a course called The Big Shift about 6 years ago that 1,200 or so people took. That was all about how do you listen to your emotions as signals and make sense of them. And I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do in that. And I've spent the last like 6 years trying to figure out how to do this again in a way that scales and allows people to create, it like onboards people better to this so that they can actually attune more quickly to their own emotions, where there's like a domino effect of like, once you develop a little bit of emotional self-awareness, it allows you to, you're taking in more sensory like emotional sensory information, and your life gets simpler in terms of your inner emotional space, and you become more sensitive to emotions and to other people, and your life is moving in the direction that it would feel good to move it, because you're listening to emotions, which are trying to, in some sense, keep you safe, and have you do what you want to do. Provide your attachment needs and authenticity.
How long would you say someone should work on that kind of stuff individually before they start trying to move into a more group setting?
So the thing I'm working on has about 3 weeks individual before I really am encouraging people to do group stuff, as I think it's important for people to have just their attention on themselves and get some good contact with reality, with their own emotional experience. Everything I'm working on is going to be entirely free. I've been basically dedicating my life to this thing, which I think is really important and could really scale quickly and really help people get better at resolving what are essentially insecurities, the ways that their wiring is mismatched to their present environment because they're no longer in their childhood environment. They're an adult now.
And that's a big deal, that people still have the wiring from their childhood that they haven't updated into adulthood.
Exactly. Like, that's basically what you're trying to do when you're going to a therapist, is resolve that so you can make sense of your real reality and because if you're not perceiving reality as it is, you're perceiving reality through the lens of your past. It's kind of like you're wearing goggles that are distorting the present sensory information. And it's hard to do things in a reality where you're not actually perceiving it accurately.
We had spent so much time focusing on the rational brain that we have that we just didn't update the animal brain that we've been riding on for forever, ever since we started being trained to use the rational brain and override it. And so it's just been kind of stuck in that old unhelpful mode. It never got the training it needed.
Yeah, I think you do run into a limit with what you can do with thought alone, because part of the constraint is emotion, and at some point you
need to train that emotional brain.
It's like, how do you know what you want? It's based on what would feel good, and so you have to start to go back into feelings in order to get a sense of that.
It's actually ridiculously hard to know what feels good sometimes, more than sometimes, often.
No, it's totally true. It's totally true, but that's largely because we have a childhood where we didn't have an environment that helped us become aware of those emotions. It was actually maladaptive in those childhood environments for us to have emotions.
So, okay, two things. You call it the thing you're working on. Does it have a name of any kind yet?
Enjoy existing.
Enjoying existing.
Yeah.
And you keep saying that you think it's going to scale well. How does this scaling work? What empowers it to scale well?
I'm trying to create a series of kind of like short essays and stories that go with them, that capture their essence, that sort of make it more palatable, that then go along with a 100-day course. The 100 days is essentially 10 minutes max a day that is something to do first thing in the morning that will prime your body, your nervous system, your mind to sort of perceive or look for things differently, to help gather that sensory information and start to interpret that sensory information. Eventually, you start to actively, in those 10-minute sessions, feel your emotions and practice connecting those emotions with reality itself. So you're drawing causal connections with your circumstances and your feelings, which won't be perfect at first. It's a practice. But 100 days, the last course I had was essentially 4 weeks. 100 days is a really good runway length to get takeoff. And I feel pretty confident that with those 100 days, people are going to get a lot of development there. And then there's also, around that 3-week mark, starting to encourage people to join this sort of online workspace where they can co-work and process emotional signals as they need to find partners or small groups to process, you could say, desires in the context of their emotions. So like eventually you're asking questions like, what desire is giving rise to sadness right now? Which, we might have some insecurities, or you could say trauma or conditioning, that makes it so that sadness might be a distorted emotion to have, or loneliness or anxiety or anger might be a distorted emotional reaction. But if you frame it in the context of a desire, you can still sort of suss out the approach response within that emotional signal and get useful direction that way. And the whole time, it's sort of it's layered so that you're doing something like a little bit progressively more complicated that requires a little bit more somatic or like emotional self-awareness.
How close is this to getting to an alpha phase where other people could participate?
I'm hopeful about 3 or 4 weeks from now. So not too far after the podcast release.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere someone can go online to look at this?
Yeah, enjoyexisting.org.
Nice. Okay, enjoyexisting.org. And I'm assuming there may be some way to contact you as well through that?
Yeah, or you can just email me, eric@ericlanningen.com. Anyone who wants to reach out, feel free.
Fantastic. I'm kind of wrapping up here because we're running low on time.
This was really wonderful. I'm so glad that you invited me on here to talk about this stuff. I think it's super important. Of course, that's my perspective. It's super relevant to understand how emotions work in how we make sense of reality, how they can be irrational based on our past conditioning, having you perceive reality through a distorted lens, how to resolve that, and then how to actually use them rationally to guide you. Because emotions have directional, they hold your attention on something, and they're motivational. Like there's energy in emotions. And if you're not using that energy or that stress, which is physiologically mobilizing consciousness to solve a problem or capitalize on an opportunity, you're suboptimally orienting with your attention and energy usage. And you end up having to suppress your own inner emotions and stress responses to get shit done that you think you should do. And you just end up like in this force response where you're like suppressing your own emotions and stresses to do the things you should do. You just can't be happy and do that. You can't like willpower your way into happiness. It requires alignment. You can't, punish yourself into achievement and actually enjoy it. So I really do think that this education is essential, which is why I want to make it as accessible and scalable and to create a context for providing this sort of connection resource by having people that you can share vulnerably with and talk about, I had this situation happen. I noticed these feelings. I had these thoughts. And have other people sort of understand that you're describing how your body is processing sensory information given your past context. So there's no judgment. There's no shame. There's no stepping in to tell you what you should do. They're just like understanding that you're working through your own processing to create a safe environment for you to figure out what you actually want. I think that we want that. I think that feels really good.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here. Enjoyexisting.org. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. This was really interesting.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a platform to share this information.
Yeah, thank you too. Bye.
Bye.
Stephen, welcome back.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Pretty darn good.
You know what else is good stuff?
Is it something to do with our friends at the Guild of the Rose?
That's right.
The Guild of the Rose. We've been partnering with them for over a year. Coming close to 2 years, maybe? It's been a while at this point.
Time is ephemeral to me.
Right?
It's been somewhere between 2 months and 2 years.
They have the mission of helping raise the general sanity waterline of the entire world. And obviously, they're starting with the rationalists first, with a number of things you can do to help improve your thinking and your everyday life with various workshops and online meeting spaces with other people.
To tie it into the episode we just had with Eric, I mean, it's not all, nerdy Vulcan shit either. There's everything about self-improvement and emotional intelligence. Seriously, check it out. I don't know how else to sell it. If you're not sold yet, you're not listening.
Well, and a lot of it, when I was talking to Matt about it, isn't even necessarily like you need to sell somebody on it. Like some people are just coming into the podcast now and just learning about it. But he said that every month they would get people that are like, I kept thinking I should join the Guild of Rose, and then I didn't. And just hearing about it every episode finally got me around to like, okay, yes, right. I've been meaning to do this. And after 6 months, they finally buckled down and did it. So just a little occasional reminder apparently helps.
Awesome. We heard that, everybody. Social proof. Go check it out.
Exactly. guildoftheRose.org or link in the show notes, yes?
Yes.
Alrighty. A couple feedbacks before we go forward. Okay, Stephen, I don't know how causal any of this is, but before we aired our episode on Lighthaven, I checked and the fundraiser was in the low $900,000 range. And then 2 days after the episode aired, it was close to 1.1 million. So a swing of about $150,000 in the course of 3.5 days. And I don't know if this is causally related to our podcast going out. I mean, who's to say really? But that did happen. So that's pretty awesome.
It has to be related. I mean, most of that was me, actually. But
nice.
Somebody else probably threw in something.
For that much money, they'll probably name a building after you.
They'd better.
Yeah.
But in sincerity, some of that was me. So
Yeah.
to be clear, the fundraiser is still running through the end of February?
January 13th. Assuming you hear this on release day, you have less than a week to get in donations.
I was going to say, if you donate now, you can write it off on your taxes, but this episode is going out after the new year. So whenever you do donate, it is tax deductible, however much you donate.
Yeah, I've noticed I give a non-insignificant amount of money to charity every year, but I never hit the limit to make a tax benefit off of it, I don't think.
Right, because the standard deduction is so generous these days.
Yeah, but if you're the kind of person who has more complicated taxes where you don't do standard deductions, and you can write it off. But it is a 501c3, so if that is a factor, go nuts. But even if the tax business isn't, then that shouldn't be that your deciding factor there. Go to lesswrong.com and click the banner at the top that says Less Wrong is fundraising.
All right. This was at this point months ago, talking on the Discord, and people were kind of like talking about what is even the point of the quantum mechanics sequences.
I feel you guys.
And here is another thing that came up, which I'm like, okay, I want to do it for completion's sake. I want to do it like just to show that I can do it. And there are some other mini benefits, which I think this is one of them. The assumptions that the collapse theories make, the Copenhagen interpretation, are just legit nonsensical. Cannot exist in a causal physical universe. They are as nonsensical as positing a god. Many worlds interpretation doesn't violate anything. It's maybe bizarre and weird and hard to wrap your mind around, but at least it doesn't posit any straight up nonsensical bullshit. I think that's the point of this particular sequence, because you can't prove it. All you can do is point to these two interpretations and apply the skills of rationality to them. And if you apply the skills of rationality, Copenhagen obviously loses. The exercise then is, are you going to just ignore the many worlds interpretation because it's so unintuitive and so clashes with everything you see in the real world that you're going to reject what your rationality training tells you and be like, no, I'm just not going to go at this point? Or are you going to be like, you know what, my intuitive understanding of things has been demonstrated to be flawed many times in my life. Am I going to reject many worlds this time? Or am I going to be like, you know what, I think this is probably right because these are the tools that point me that way. So I think it's a good exercise on really taking the edge case of how is rationality useful to right up to its limit.
I agree, and I think I was talked into I was won over on the value of doing these a few episodes ago. I'm trying to remember. The Copenhagen one is just about like superpositions collapsing upon being observed or something. Was that it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that does sound weird. I'm not enough of a quantum physicist yet to say that it's obviously ridiculous compared to many worlds, but many worlds doesn't require a conscious observer to like make the universe happen.
Exactly.
So that does sound weird. I wonder if there's some Steelman of that. But in any case, and he kept saying how bizarre and weird many worlds is. I mean, it's not, I don't know, it doesn't keep me up at night with how weird it is. And there's lots of things that don't break the laws of physics that we're fine with. Even if you can't interact with them in principle. He talked about shooting a photon at the speed of light, and once it goes actually really anywhere, but beyond a certain distance, it's like impossible to interact with in principle.
Mm-hmm.
The reasonable conclusion there is like, yeah, it's still going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is maybe getting too into the weeds for just focusing on the Less Wrong posts, but like, I was raised in the days of good old-fashioned science, falsifiability and Popper and all that, and was awesome. And that was all the ammunition about, that fueled our side during the New Atheism Wars. But again, I can't falsify that the photon continues to exist once it passes the edge of the observable universe, right?
Yeah.
It would be ridiculous for me to say that it vanishes. For all intents and purposes, it might as well not exist to me, but that doesn't mean it's not there. All that's to say is that the many worlds interpretation, I mean, it's all fun and games and hypothetical up until we can start jumping universes. So let's maybe this will be testable someday.
I was about to say, like, yeah, except then you said jumping universes, which is not a thing that Many Worlds says that you can do.
Well, is it strictly prohibited? I mean, if the universes are there, I'm not a quantum physicist, but
I believe the answer is yes, it is strictly prohibited. There is no jumping universes because everything already exists concurrently and you don't like jump between them.
Right, yeah. If the alternate universes are as concurrent and as real as ours, there's not, a way in because there's no way out of ours. All right,
Yeah.
I think that's making sense. But in any case, yeah, no, I think you're right. And to reiterate, I think the punchline of what you're saying there is that are you really going to reject your rationality at this point because your many times demonstrated to be flawed intuition is yet again saying this is just too unintuitive?
Mhm.
And I think that's a really good rejoinder. That brings us to no individual particles.
This one, pretty quick, I thought.
Yeah,
Just reiterates, reminds us that
it reiterates the title.
Yeah, exactly. Reminds us that the physics of our universe take place in a multi-particle configuration space. And since it's been a few months since we had a Less Wrong post, for a reminder, unfortunately you can't see this because this is an audio medium, but if you go back to the original post, there's the little 2D graph that shows a shaded area where particles can be, and it's like darker shading where they're more likely to be, and not shaded at all where they can't be at all, and various darker shadings where the two particles can both be in the same place, that kind of thing. That is the universe. It is a big cloud of probabilities of amplitudes. So in classical physics, the particles that are in this graph are the fundamental things. The configuration space is just an isomorphic way of looking at them. In quantum physics, the configuration space is the fundamental thing, and you just get the appearance of an individual particle, which is a heckin' difference. Does that make sense when you think about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, isomorphic just means like similar in whatever kind, or identical in kind, maybe, or in function. So like I've used the phrase like functionally isomorphic substitutes for neurons would, whether it's other neurons or transistors makes no difference. So, in classical physics, the billiard ball style we're all taught, the little balls are the bottom of reality.
They're the real thing. The graph is one way of plotting where they are and thinking about them and looking at them.
Right. And then in quantum physics, the configuration space is the fundamental thing, not the billiard balls.
Yes, the graph is
you get
the real
appearance of billiard balls.
Yep. So it's flipped. The billiard balls are ways of thinking about what is actually real, which is that space of probabilities. But that is the real thing. There are no balls anywhere. There is no spoon.
I don't want to jump the gun, but this does kind of jump us straight to the question of like, what is an individual point in the configuration space then? The answer is that it's physics, and physics is math. You've got to come to terms with thinking in pure mathematical objects. I admit that's still something of a hurdle for me. To me, pure math is like 2 + 2 = 4. And that's not a thing I can, rest my hand on and pick up and touch. So thinking of pure math objects as being things I can collide with is unusual. So I think I'm still missing some inferential bridging there, but we're working on it.
Yeah. I can't help you there.
There goes my hope.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
I bet the rest of the sequence will help me get along there. So
at this point, the math is starting to leave me behind, and I am mostly resting on, yes, I can, in fact, imagine the universe where the configuration space is the real thing and there aren't actual real particles. That's just an illusion.
I guess, illusion makes it sound like it doesn't exist. Like I can actually go up and touch it. It's water I can actually drink, right? So
Yeah.
I can understand the graphs a bit, and I can follow, especially every Feynman quote pretty well, but I'm still struggling to grasp how this collection of this configuration amplitude that makes up this mug of water that I'm holding is in any sense not real. It's as real as I could ever want it to be, right? God, I feel like such a pseudoscientist, or like whatever, a huckster, just like regurgitating these words and
without knowing what they mean exactly.
Yeah, this
yeah,
is
that's
all
why I'm trying not to say the ones I don't understand.
All right, well, let's try to say the ones we don't understand about the rest of this post, or the ones that we do understand, rather. So,
okay.
I do understand this. If I take a balloon full of photons and shake it up, the amplitudes are going to go all over the place.
Yes.
And if you try to label, imagine that you can label the original apparent photons. They're all going to be different places at the end, right?
Not only are they going to be at different places at the end, but they're going to take a zillion Feynman paths to get there. Meaning, remember how the previous sequence reading, we were talking about the photon doesn't just go directly from where it is to the mirror, bounce off at the angle of incidence, and go to a second place. It actually travels along every single path and bounces off every single angle of the mirror, or bounces off the mirror at every single angle, but they all either cancel out or reinforce themselves, so it looks identical to as if it just took the one path where it bounces off the center of the mirror at the angle of incidence?
Yes. Unless you're looking at a mirror made from a CD and you're looking at the shiny bits of that, then you get to see all the cool
Right.
refractive bits, like we talked about, I think, in one of our previous posts. Some of our cool Discord people pointed those things out.
The particles will take every single path possible and every single way that they can bounce, not just the ways the classical laws of physics would dictate. So it becomes a whole weird cloud of amplitudes, and then they end up at other positions because those clouds cancel or reinforce in certain ways that end up with probabilities at a certain level in certain places, which is not the same thing as balls moving around chaotically.
Right. In our intuitions, for those of us, I'm speaking, I think, on behalf of all humans who aren't quantum physicists, I intuitively picture, again, billiard balls in a balloon, and I shake it around because this is a useful abstraction. But the important thing is that it's an abstraction, and I kind of picture them colliding like if I shook up a big bag of actual billiard balls in zero gravity or something, right? They'd hit each other, they'd bounce off the edges, whatever, and they'd be in different spots, but they'd move there from, along lines, even if they're chaotic and hard to predict. But that's not how it really works.
Right.
Like I said, it goes under a continuously branching evolution that involves each of the original bulges of the configuration amplitudes. And it's not that you don't know which photon went where, it's that there's no fact of the matter.
Yeah. Ooh, can I read this paragraph that he wrote, which is hard to read?
Oh, please.
The amplitude factor that corresponds to the balloon full of photons subspace, which contains bulges of amplitude subfactors at various different locations in the photon field, will undergo a continuously branching evolution that involves each of the original bulges ending up in many different places by all sorts of path, and the final configuration will have amplitude contributed from many different permutations.
It's kind of cool to think about. So back with the mirrors, the final result here is a factor of every configuration along the way, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of it's fun to think about it that way. Well, let's hold on to that, and we can move into identity isn't in specific atoms.
Yes, this is a fun divergent train of thought, I think, that goes off of all this.
Yeah.
So we're taking a quick break from quantumness in order to rip on the zombie people again.
I can get us started here. So suppose I take two atoms of helium-4 in a balloon and swap their positions via teleportation. I don't move them through intervening space. I just click my fingers, and that causes them to swap places. Afterward, the balloon looks just the same, but the two helium atoms have changed positions. Now, did that scenario make sense? Can you imagine it happening?
Yeah. And here's the thing. If you imagine the world in the classic way where atoms are the fundamental things, these billiard balls are the real things that exist, then obviously you could imagine it happening. But if you imagine the world where that graph with the shaded areas is the is the real reality, then you literally can't imagine it happening, because you say, like, I snap my fingers and the graph changes from being shaded in these ways to being shaded in exactly the same way. Like,
Exactly.
What are you talking about? Nothing has changed. It's the same picture. To quote The Office.
Yeah, but I love that as a way to drive the intuition home, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right. Like in the classical way of viewing them, it's like, yeah, I've got, billiard ball A and billiard ball B, and you've told me they switch spaces, and okay, sure, I understand they're identical, but those two identical things change places. That makes sense. But if you show them, again, like just the graph of probability, it's like, look, I set my fingers and the graph stayed the same.
Yeah.
Now, can you tell me that these actually switch places?
Yeah. You're like, this part that I called A before, I'm calling B now, and this part that I called B, I'm calling A. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, you can just change the labels on things.
Yeah, so the correct answer is that this is absolute physical nonsense if you have the deep quantum view internalized.
Yes.
Which brings us to
The transporter problem.
if you build an exact physical replica of a human, but you're using different atoms, is it the same person or just a copy? And of course, the answer being, if you've really internalized that there is no such thing as different atoms, then what are you even asking? Atoms don't have differentiable identity like that.
Yeah, and if that sounds unintuitive, I mean, just imagine the balloon having 4 helium atoms instead of 2, and swapping places of those, and the graph looks the same, right? And then just keep adding those until you get enough atoms to make a person, and then swap all of those again.
Yeah.
You end up with exactly the same thing, and like the same in principle. For anyone to lose any sleep about like whether or not their consciousness or their self or whatever is lost in that process, they have to be imagining something above and beyond the atoms and their relationships to each other.
Right.
I don't want to say they have to invoke magic, but it's at least something that is not. I'm trying to think of some charitable way to frame this such that I wouldn't get in that teleporter machine people aren't offended. I guess they're hedging on the fact that, hey, I don't know exactly what's going on with this consciousness business. I'm not going to roll those dice, right? So I can see where they're coming from. Like I said, I probably would be the first one to get into one, but I'd be, happy to be in the first dozen.
If I were to not get in a transporter machine, it wouldn't be because of this. It would be because I think, maybe the fuse is going to blow at the bad time or something.
Right. Or, depending on how they dispose of the original, if it is deconstructed, that's great. If it's dropped into a vat of water and drowned, then no.
Spoilers for an amazing Nolan movie.
Not going to tell you which one.
Nope.
Yeah. So, like I said, he's taking more of a dig at the zombie stuff.
Here's an interesting thing that he points out as well, because right now we're looking just like at individual atoms, but he expands it to all of configuration space, pointing out that the state of your brain from 1 second ago is not the state of your brain now. So even in the course of a single second, the joint position of all the atoms in your brain is going to change. Like, obviously, there's going to be some movement of some particles somewhere in your brain, and probably lots of particles will move in lots of ways. This will change far enough from what it was before that there's no overlap with the previous joint amplitude distribution. Like, the graph cloud of probabilities is going to move significantly, and that is the base reality. Like, there aren't individual atoms, right? So the base reality morphs a lot from moment to moment, and you're going to be made up of a completely different, non-overlapping volume of configuration space. The thing that actually makes you up in physical reality changes wildly all the time.
I might need that unpacked a bit, because I'm on board with all of that until you say there's no overlap. 'Cause there's enough of it that I'm not falling apart and reconstructing and stuff, right?
Okay, yeah, all right. I guess by no overlap, he means not a complete recreation from what was before, which is like what people tend to think of in terms of atoms. Like, one atom is one inviolable thing. The configuration spaces are not that. You would have to have it be basically identical to what it was before to be the same thing as before.
Right. Yeah, and I guess he's talking about the joint amplitude distribution of presumably the entire universe.
At the very least, your entire brain, and probably the entire universe, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if I just get up and move around the room, everything's changing, right?
Yeah,
every particle in the room and every edge of it is impacting a slightly different gravitational pull on every molecule of my body. If I move around the room, that changes a little bit. Yeah, so there's definitely shuffling happening, but not enough to where, again, I think maybe I'm just hung up on no overlap, because there's not enough happening when I cross the room usually that I forget why I crossed it, right?
I love that usually. Yes. I think what he's hammering on here is that the real physical things that constitute the universe are these clouds of probability and not atoms. And therefore, what was the line? The notion that you can equate your personal continuity with the identity of physical, real constituents of your existence is completely hopeless, because the physically real constituents of your existence aren't atoms. They're these amplitude distributions, and those are changing all the time.
Yeah. And then the punchline being that the new factor over subspace looks a whole lot like the old you did, and not by coincidence. The flow of time is lawful, and there are causes and effects and preserved commonalities.
I love when we get to that later on in the sequences. And maybe this is another reason why the quantum sequences are important, because that's a very important thing. The future is a direct outgrowth of the present due to the lawful flow of time. So that has a lot to say about free will when we get there.
It does. That'll be fun. All right.
But yes, you are not just a weird, chaotic thing that bursts in and out of existence. You are absolutely a lawful flow from one moment to the next.
That's right.
Cool. Well, for next time, we get to have a little bit more fun with this before we get back into quantum stuff itself.
Yeah, I like the next one is Zombies, the movie.
Yeah. And that's just a really fun sequence post. We can't skip that one.
No.
And then after that, 3 dialogues on identity, which we will also be reading.
Awesome. Well, then it's time for the most fun part of the show.
Hell yeah.
Oh, good. It's my turn. I
Yes.
don't know if it's clear at this point. We don't record all the episodes in one sit down usually anymore. So sometimes it takes a moment to remember whose turn it is to give a shout out. And this time it's me. I get to give a huge high five to Kuiper.
Hell yeah, Kuiper! Kuiper's my homie, actually. We first met at Vibe Camp, where we did a little presentation about writing fiction together. This man actually makes a living writing fiction, which is awesome. And he supports the show with a little bit of that living from writing fiction. So, dude, Kuiper, thank you. Strongly appreciate it.
Yeah, that means a lot. We really appreciate it. You rock.
It helps keep the show going. It helps keep us feeling like we're making some non-zero contribution to the human endeavor by some people showing that they appreciate it with their money. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to everybody who supports us, and of those who can't, who leave ratings and reviews on iTunes or wherever they get the show. All that helps too.
Yeah. And, for whatever it's worth, if you find an episode or, there's some content in some episode that you think someone might enjoy, share it with them. That's how I come across every podcast I ever get is, at least 90% of them is somebody saying, hey, have you listened to this? So, that's another way to spread it around.
All right. Thank you for listening to us, Stephen. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, man. It's always a pleasure. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks.
Yep. Have a good New Year's.
I shall. You too.
Bye.